Breakout year.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what happens. 2017 is when he was recruited. This man is just
LynJ Dixon, which I think was 27, would have been 2017, maybe
Mhm.
2018 recruiting class, a year younger. But the dude was committed to play for Butch Jones. He was a Butch Jones commit. Obviously goes to Clemson out of college, and now he is back at Tennessee after his prior commitment, I say once again, was to Butch Jones.
That's insane. Also, we do need to talk about Lyn-J Dixon because he comes in the building over the weekend. I would love to know how many calls are going into the registrar office over the last couple of days. I want to know how this goes for like the late transfers and stuff like that. Where, I mean, hey, classes, Tennessee might benefit from this, where classes still don't start till literally like the 28th or whatever this year. You're done with that, Ryan. You're a
I am done
graduate.
with
You
that.
you don't have to worry about any of that. My last semester here in grad school, but I do wonder how that works. So they're like, hey, we need this guy in here. We're really thin on the margin. So whatever we got to do. And they're like, well, every class is full. And it's like, well, they're not because Lyn-J needs to be in some classes. So what do we got to do? We got to overload whatever the classes he needs. But I was listening to people talk about just around campus last month of just like, yeah, I can't get my kid into anything because it's full. And like they got accepted and all this, but their registration window was late. So now these classes they need, they can't get into. And I'm like, I wonder how that works for the football team. I wonder what calls are made and are like, hey, just it technically full, but we have 2 open spots in the portal. So I need you to keep those 2 seats in that classroom open just in case we bring in somebody.
Yeah, someone tells me it's not a huge problem for the football program getting those guys into classes. And, it's funny you bring up the point of the late classes
Mm,
here in the fall and actually helping them because I think we talked about it at the time. I think how late the January or the winter session, spring session,
yes.
I guess what I called, started last year really hurt them. Isaiah Nayer, who knows if he would have been but he flipped to Texas after when classes would have normally started. And
Mm,
then obviously with the basketball program, you're playing a lot of games without students on campus in January. And then with the baseball program, they had to start practice a week later basically than they normally would have. So it's nice to see the late start maybe helping some things out on this end of it after I couldn't hardly believe how that I think I said at the time. But I can't imagine if Nick Saban didn't want classes starting late in January at Alabama, I'm sure they wouldn't be. And if it when it hurts the football program, that usually makes things change pretty quickly. So it'll be interesting to see going forward.
So what do you actually expect out of him? Because he was a good player early on in his Clemson days. Bounced around. He was had a cup of coffee in Morgantown. Not really sure what happened there, and why maybe it's just the Graham Harrell offense where it's like, okay, this is going to be very, very pass, and this is just not where I need to be. And Tennessee, like for whatever reason, like there's just a lot of people misconstrue the Heupel offense where it's air
Yeah.
raid, and it's like that's not how
No.
this offense works at all. And I mean, just watch the tape of Tion Evans this past year, where it's like you can thrive in this offense as a running back. And I wonder because people are like, oh, it's Jabari Small. I'm like, I think all 4 or 5 of these guys are going to play. Like, I just don't see a way where Dylan Sampson doesn't play some. I don't see a way where like injuries are going to be a part of this. Jabari Small is not playing 12 healthy games. That's not a thing. That's not going to happen. And they're going to have to get production out of their freshmen. And I think Lyn-J has the most upside because he was a highly regarded prospect, 4-star years ago back in the Reagan administration, and he is, he's interesting. He's shifty. He's a different kind of back than what Tennessee actually has in the roster right now, right?
Yeah, he is interesting because I think when you look at what he did early in his Clemson career, you playing behind Travis Etienne, it's kind of like this is a guy that could easily come in and be, a 1B to Jabari Small and be Tennessee's second back and have a really big role. But in his kind of Benjamin Button career, he hasn't, he didn't do a whole lot his last few years at
Hmm.
Clemson. I think an injury in there. And that's where I think at the very least it was huge to get him with Lenny Whitehead being out for the season. That was already a position Tennessee wasn't very deep at, and then you lose one of your 3 returning scholarship guys before their first practice, and it was like, oh my gosh, they're incredibly thin. And that was media day Sunday when Heupel said that, and then we kind of got done, and people were hanging out in the lobby, and here walks in Lyn-J Dixon on his visit, and everyone kind of looks around like, well, this makes a lot of sense. They need this guy, and I think that's where it was a really good pickup. His ceiling, I think he's a guy who could be really good and be one of Tennessee's best backs this year. And at his worst, it's just another body that Tennessee really needs. And I think now I don't necessarily disagree with what you said about Justin Williams Thomas and Dylan Sampson. Those guys are going to play, but I think it's hard to ask both of those guys to be ready to carry a sizable load. And I think when you, like, just what you said about Jabari Small and his injuries, if you didn't have Lyn-J Dixon, I think both of those guys, they need to be ready to play a lot, because if anybody goes down, their number's gonna be called. I think now when you add a Lyn-J Dixon, if both those guys meet the opportunity, I think both of those guys will play. But at the same time, I think now you only need one of those guys to really be able to step up and be able to play a lot of snaps as a freshman. And then the other one, I don't think there's a whole lot of separation in those guys, at least from what I've seen early on. And I think at that point, one of them can be in a little bit more of a spot role, and then one of them is in a bigger role. And I think it just takes pressure off of both of those guys adding Dixon.
Interesting. Stanton Ramil, kind of a shocker, goes with Michigan State. The hope was that Tennessee got 2 of the Big Four. They do not. Like we I think talked about 2 weeks ago. Still would not rule out Lucas Simmons, especially with how Florida State season might go. And I think they're gonna keep going after Lucas, and we'll see what happens on that front over the next couple of months. But I don't know, how big of a whiff is it that Stanton Ramil picks Michigan State, one of the highest rated offensive tackles that Michigan State I think's ever actually had going into East Lansing. What was that a surprise for you, and how does Tennessee rebound?
No, I mean, I don't think it was, maybe a small surprise, not a big one. I mean, I kind of viewed it as Ramil or for Ramil, Tennessee and Michigan State being kind of neck and neck for a while.
Mm,
But I do think it's a big miss, and it's just what you said at the beginning. The 4 offensive linemen with Francis,
mm.
Simmons, obviously to get Sham from down in Georgia, and then Ramil. You needed to get 2 of those guys, and you were only able to get one. I think you're right. I think Tennessee stays hard on Simmons, and I think it's a lot of kind of evaluation now. I wouldn't be surprised if this is one of those situations where those were very clearly the 4 guys they were going after.